Hi everyone, this is part 2 of my video for how to practice scales. This video will cover the medium tips and exercises for your scales. These are great for students of an intermediate level who are already confident with a number of scales. Some of these exercises would be great for a beginner student who's learnt a couple of scales and is looking for an extra challenge. So the first tip is to say the note or sing the note as you play it. So that could take a number of forms. So you could say the notes by their note name. So if we're playing the C major scale, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. Or you could say the scale degrees, which I think is really important, especially with guitar where a lot of our scales can translate into different keys without changing our finger shape or the box shape that we play. So playing and saying the scale degrees would be like this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. If you're playing a minor scale, it could be like this. 1, 2, flat 3, 4, 5, flat 6, flat 7, 8. So another element to this is singing the notes as you play them as well. So singing along to the guitar. So for some of you, singing may be something that you're not too confident doing in front of people, even in front of your guitar teacher, but to at least practice this at home can be really good. When you sing along, it helps not only to train your hand on how to play the scale, but it trains your ears to internalize how the scale is supposed to sound. So an example of that would be like this. I'm going to sing the notes and say the scale degrees as I play them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So I'm definitely no singer, and singing in front of a camera is definitely not something that I enjoy. But I know that this kind of exercise is really valuable for musicians of any type. So I would highly recommend you try this at home with whichever scale you're learning. Okay, so the next exercise is to play the scale in thirds. So I'm going to move to the G major scale in second position for this one. Because this is a 2-octave scale, it definitely gives us more time to work on our thirds, and not having any open notes involved also makes it work our fingers a little bit more too. So an example of how we would play in thirds is to start on the first note, then to skip the second note and go straight to the third note. Then we go back to the second note and we skip the third note and go to the fourth note. Then we go back to the third note, skip the 4 and go to the 5. So if I play that all together, it sounds like this. Playing in thirds really works our brain and our knowledge of the scale, as well as our muscle memory of the scale, because we do have to think a little bit harder to play in those thirds. It's also a really good technical exercise, to be able to play it really fast can be really good to be able to do. It can sound kind of cool too. Alright, so that's one that I would tell most students to do that are at about an intermediate level. Once they've learned a few scales and know them fairly well, that would probably be the first thing I would tell them to do as an extra exercise with a scale. The next thing I would get an intermediate student to do is to try playing in groups of 3 or 4. So taking groups of 4 to start with, that's where we would ascend up the scale in 4 notes. Then we would go back down 3, ascend up another 4. So that would be like this. To play it in 3s is very similar. Okay, so just like thirds, we're changing up the sequence that we're playing our notes in. It's not just from start to finish or ascending and descending. We're adding different patterns to our scale. So again trains our mind and trains our fingers a little bit more. If you're practicing a pentatonic scale, some of these sequences don't quite translate to the pentatonic scale as easily because again they're different groupings of notes. We're not going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. We're going 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, or we're going 1, flat 3, 4, 5, flat 7. However, the playing in groups of 3 or groups of 4 works fairly well. So an example of that over the A minor pentatonic scale. Another really good intermediate exercise for your scales is playing legato. So far we've picked every note in the scale. Legato is where we will add hammer-ons across each string. We would pick the first note on that string, and then it would be either hammer-ons or pull-offs for the rest of the notes on that string until we move on to the next string. So here's an example of legato over the G major scale. If you watch my right hand carefully, you'll see I only pick every string once. So the final intermediate exercise for practicing scales is to transpose your scales, either to a new key or a new position. So to explain that further, transposing to a new position would be playing the G major scale in second position. And then figuring out how to play it in a different position. So still G major, but a different position. So another position could be this. Or this one. So we can hear that one is a different octave as well, but that's fine. It's still the G major scale. So the more places you can play one scale, the better. The other part of this exercise, transposing to a new key, is fairly easy on the guitar. Once I've memorized this G major shape, to change key, all I have to do is start that shape from a different position. So if I want to play the C major scale, I can make sure that my starting note is on a C note instead of a G note. So up here on the 8th fret is our C note, and then I play the same shape or the same patterns with my fingers across those frets. And now I have a new scale. This is a really important way to practice as guitarists because it acts like a shortcut for us. Once we can play one major scale, we can play all major scales as long as we know where to locate the starting note or the root note along the 6th string.